Hi, Zizaran here with another video update on Scrya, my editor's wonderful monk. A lot of you guys have been enjoying it. On top of that, Sai, my build manager, and Scrya are working together to put up a full build guide for this on Maxroll. So there will be a written version of it as well, and this will be the final video update for the monk. So Scrya, take it away.
The Ice Strike Monk has been a very fun and very strong build throughout the entire endgame and through the campaign in Path of Exile 2. I've managed to clear the entire game with this build, including Shashtula 4, Arbiter, and all of the other endgame content that the game currently has to offer. It has been a breeze, even as someone with a full-time job and other hobbies on the side. The reason I say that this is the strongest melee build that anyone can play is because it doesn't require any uniques or any special mechanics to get started. It doesn't really abuse any interactions that seem unintended or anything that really breaks the game. You're just a guy with a stick that puts a bell down and hits it for further effect. If you'd like a full leveling guide for this build that starts at level 0 and goes all the way to maps, then I've made a video about that before that covers the entire process from level 0 to level 65. You can find that link in the video description and on the top right corner on the screen right now. What makes this build really strong is that the mobility is really solid and really snappy, you're always on the move, and your damage is really high. And with the combo of Shattering Palm and Herald of Ice, you are going to chain shatter everything on the screen really nicely and smoothly. It's going to feel really nice and really crunchy for clear, and the build has enough scaling power that you can clear the entire endgame with pretty high damage and remaining fast and adaptable during a boss fight. So the Ascendancy order is going to be covered in the Maxroll planner and in the upcoming written guide. Stay tuned for that. But the first one you're going to take is going to be I Am the Blizzard, followed by And I Shall Rage. Unbound Avatar is going to be extremely useful for early maps and in the campaign because it's going to allow you to have a huge amount of burst damage to just one-shot every boss in the game that you need. But later on, when targets start being way too tanky to burst within one Unbound Avatar use, I don't think it's that great anymore. However, you should still take it as your second Ascendancy and swap out that later, which I will cover in just a bit. Your third Ascendancy will be Lead Me Through Grace. Essentially what it does is that the better your body armor is, the more spirit you're going to get to fit all of your offensive and defensive auras. Protect Me From Harm is a really good Ascendancy that is going to make you really tanky and enable you to do higher tier maps with ease. If you don't have your fourth Ascendancy yet and you feel like you're dying in maps, you could always unspec out of Unbound Avatar in I Now Shall Rage and pick up Protect Me From Harm instead. Now, as you might have noticed both in the planner and in the upcoming guide, there is a swap when you reach 50% crit or higher. Essentially, when your crit chance is consistent enough, you can drop Unbound Avatar and grab Sunder My Enemies. Sunder My Enemies is a huge consistent damage boost to the build because it allows you to completely bypass monster elemental resistances. Now they can't go negative anymore, but it just makes it so that your enemies' resistances are now 0, which is a huge damage boost. Now the reason that ignoring monster elemental resistances is really good for the build is that it allows us to drop things like Cold Penetration and nodes like Heavy Frost on the build, which saves us a lot of skill points. So how do we get our crit chance up to make it consistent and making picking up Sunder My Enemies worth it? Well, the first main obvious one is to pick up all the crit nodes that are at the start of Monk, at the right of the skill tree, and then at the start of Ranger. The second way to get your crit chance up is by picking up jewels. As you can see, every single jewel that I have in my tree apart from one is a Sapphire jewel that has crit hit chance as its most important stat, followed by cold damage or elemental damage. The third and more trickier way to cap your crit is by having crit hit chance on your weapon. This is going to be your third priority after having good physical damage and attack speed, but it's a really important stat because it multiplies all your other crit chance, because this is the base crit chance that your weapon has of critically striking. So with the Combat Frenzy buff, while mapping, we're going to be generating power charges with the help of the Resonance Keystone, which makes it so that Combat Frenzy gives us power charges instead of frenzy charges. To use those power charges, that we don't really use Charge Staff during mapping, we are going to be running Charge Infusion, which just gives us more critical hit chance. In a boss fight, we're going to be using all our power charges to sustain our charge staff at maximum charges. Having charge infusion would make that harder, hence why we swap to a cast on shock setup. Now I can explain the bossing setup in this build. When you start up a boss fight, the first thing you're going to do is hit the target 4 times to generate a bell and plop the bell down. Hitting the bell will shock and chill and start freezing the target, but it will also generate power charges because we are freezing and shocking our bell. When you get those power charges, you're going to cast Charge Staff at low charges. With those charges that you generate, you're going to use Charge Staff right away to get lightning damage up to start shocking your bell even more. Shocking the Bell will then cause Eye of Winter and Sniper's Mark to be cast, which will give you more chance to crit and will give you more power charges. Once you're at full power charge, which is 5 in the case of this build, you're going to use Charge Staff again at full power for even more damage and plop another bell down, and now you're doing max damage. It has a little bit of a ramp up, but it's completely worth it because you're going to double or even triple or more on your damage when all of this setup is done. What about mapping? Do you use Charge Staff when mapping or do you not? I don't think that during mapping you need Charge Staff at all. The damage is not really needed, and one thing that I dislike about Charge Staff when mapping is that you no longer really dash to the targets that are close to you because Charge Staff will prioritize using those projectiles against them. So it kind of takes a little bit of mobility away. You can still use Charge Staff if you'd like, but I prefer not using it during mapping. I don't really see the point, don't really need the damage, and I would really prefer those power charges to be used for Charge Infusion instead to give me more consistent yet passive damage. Now when it comes to gear, there is nothing really specific that this build requires. All of your items are going to be rare items that just focus on the basic stats. However, let's focus the most important piece of gear at the start, which is going to be your chest piece when you start mapping. So it brings me to say that the chest piece is a very important slot is because of the Lead Me Through Grace node. So what this node does that it's really important is that it's going to take the evasion rating and energy shield from your chest, and it's going to make spirit out of that. In order to maximize that, we want a chest piece with a lot of evasion and a lot of energy shield. I wouldn't worry about life too much on the chest, just prioritize getting your evasion rating and energy shield up ASAP, because having more auras is going to make your build way stronger both offensively and defensively. Now the second most important part of this build is having a good staff. The priority of stats that you want out of your quarterstaff is as follows. First, you want really high physical DPS, followed by high attacks per second. The high physical DPS is obviously going to make you deal more damage, but the high attack speed is very important to make your build feel a lot smoother and more fluid to play. The third priority will be to get crit hit chance. This crit hit chance will be the base crit of your weapon and will make all of your other crit hit chance modifiers better. Now the last priority, and this is a luxury, it's going to be very expensive to fit all of this, is to have crit damage bonus on your staff. This works like attack speed and crit hit chance in the way that it's a base multiplier for all your other crit damage bonus. It's a huge damage increase when your crit is consistent, but again, it's a luxury, and fitting all of this in a staff is going to be extremely expensive. I wouldn't bother to look for a staff unless I have a few hundred exalts to spend on my weapon. Now the rest of your gear is going to be fairly basic. You're just looking for life and resists and the attributes that you need to equip your gems. Now some things to strive for in your build when you're in the endgame and you want to invest on your build. First, it would be 30% MS or higher boots, so having a lot of movement speed in your boots is going to make everything more fun and more fluid. Another one would be to have increased attack speed on your gloves. You can also get crit bonus on your gloves, but that's going to be extremely hard to get with attack speed on top, and I find attack speed to be more important. Another tip for gearing would be to get a mana regen rate Amulet base. This is going to help with mana a lot. I will cover mana issues that this build can have and how to solve them a bit later. One more thing that we can do with this build is that if you have your resistances capped without having a belt, you can look at Rislatha's Coil. Rislatha's Coil is pretty expensive to fit in your build because of all the resistance pressure. However, it's a pretty big damage increase. By making your average physical damage more consistent and also bring it up a bit, Rislatha's Coil is going to be a pretty big damage increase, but it's definitely a luxury. Now you might be confused, this is physical attack damage and this is a cold build. However, for gems and for gear, this will remember that this is a physical build that then gets converted to cold. So this will work just as support gems with physical damage will work for both Ice Strike and Bell. Now if you find yourself with mana issues on bosses for any reason, here are some tips that I found that really helped me figure out my mana for this build. First of all, remove all support gems that have a mana cost multiplier. The only cost multiplier support gem that I have in your build is Primal Armament. The other support gems that also have a mana cost, like Heft and others, I just completely removed them because they were making the mana cost completely unbearable. So make sure to look in the max roll planner for all the gem links and how they're laid out, because it actually really matters when it comes to sustaining your mana. I also have a level 20 gem, which will make it harder. If you don't have a level 20 gem, this maybe won't be as much of a problem. Other ways of fixing your mana issues would be by picking up conservative casting and deep trance. That will help with your mana costs, as well as having mana leech on one of your rings or anywhere you can get it really. When it comes to anointing your amulet, I think the best one will be Vulgar Methods. What Vulgar Methods does, it just gives you some strength that you're going to need to use your support gems, and it's going to give you a lot of crit chance, at the cost of some reduced mana, which doesn't really matter. For a cheaper early game option, I would recommend Blur.
Alright, speaking of the latest patch, they just changed a couple things about the build. One is our ability to permafreeze, which did not change at all. This build deals so much damage in map bosses that you just kind of one-shot them within a single freeze anyway, which comes out very fast. Other than that, for endgame bosses, you weren't really able to freeze them consistently anyway. Like in a fight like Shashtula, you'd get like 2 freezes in the fight, maybe 3. So nothing really changed there. One thing that did change though is that they buffed the shit out of 2 things that are key. One of them is combat frenzy. It used to give a charge like every 6 or 7 seconds. Now it's, as you can see, it's under 2 seconds. So charge generation during mapping and during bosses is way better, which means that our damage is just more consistent. Another thing they buffed a lot is Sniper's Mark, which, if you've seen the Max Roll Planner already, is linked to Cast on Shock. You'd wonder why Cast on Shock if you're like a freeze build. Freeze does not happen too often. It wouldn't be good for bosses, but Shock, you will be shocking bosses very easily, especially because it works on the bell. So every time you shock the bell, which is enough with just charge stuff, like the lightning damage that charge stuff gives you, is gonna proc both Eye of Winter and it's gonna proc Sniper's Mark. Eye of Winter, the only reason we use it is that it applies a debuff. It applies a debuff that gives us 10% more chance to crit the target, which is like an insane damage buff. Like, it's gonna make our crits so much better. You see, as you can see, when monsters are chained like that, packed together, the dashes from just Ice Strike just get you to where you want to be, essentially, and it feels really smooth.
Still really good density.
But in a breach, this feels exactly like PoE 1.
Yeah.
Or even cooler, because, you know, the game just feels nicer.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for showing us and updating the build. And yeah, we'll have a full Maxwell link to build and stuff like that as well. So hopefully you'll all enjoy that. Awesome.
So,
Well, thanks so much. That was Scrya, my editor. He's slacking off on the editing and playing the game instead. No, he's doing a great job with everything. He's killing it. Thanks so much, Scrya. But either way, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Sub if you like it, but more importantly, try to die less than we do.